Hello everybody and welcome to another Ansible demonstration. So today I am tackling updating the interface description on switches via CDP neighbor information. So this one was posed to me by a customer, and I thought that sounds a little too simple, right? It'd be easy enough to just pull all that stuff and stick it in there. So I tried to take it up a level. The idea being I generally only interested in CDP neighbors that are, say, like other switches or routers for the most part. So a lot of devices will report CDP neighbor relationships, stuff like ATAs, right? Like for phone systems, or even like a Cisco IP phone. I know you can't tell, but I'm looking at one right here. And I don't necessarily want to tag all those ports. Ultimately, I'm just looking to change the description if it is a trunk port, right? I am taking it to either a router on a stick or another switch sort of thing. So here is my Ansible automation platform. You can see it in all its splendor, all its amazing glory here. I'm going to go ahead and launch this job template. And while this fires, I'm going to pop over here and show you my public Git repository here available for you to peruse. And it contains two files. One is a playbook and then one is a task file. And so generally, I most often see task files used in roles, and Ansible has a module called include task, and I can launch that include task module inside of a regular playbook, and it will call another file that's just full of tasks. It's really just an additional YAML file, like formatted with various tasks in there. Most often I see it in roles, because it'll be a main.yml that will just call these other task files. In this instance, I'm using it because I'm doing nested loops. So in Ansible, you can't natively nest a loop, but you can if you loop and then call a task file. So I'm gonna take a look at the initial main playbook here. So taking a look at it, it looks like any other playbook. It's got the regular play information. And then now I've got a couple of tasks in particular. So one is I am gathering facts from a device, and here I'm using the NXOS collection to NXOS facts gather. You'll notice at the top, since I'm hitting a network element, I have gather facts false up there. So by default, Ansible tries to run the setup module, and if you're doing that against, say, a Windows host or a Linux host, right, like a regular server, it's going to go and gather a bunch of information just fine, and everything will be happy. On servers, it's going to be information like what flavor of OS it is, kind of firmware version. A lot of times, hard drive information will be there, kind of connecting IP info, junk like that. That could be really useful in your automations. If you don't need that information, I would say turn gather facts off because it speeds up your runs of your playbooks, your automations. And in networking elements, I would say turn it off because it's going to break most of them, right? So it's designed to work with servers, not network elements. So generally, network elements have specific fact gathering modules. And so this one is going to connect into it, and it's going to pull a bunch of information like for one, interface configurations. So like speed, duplex, whether it's set to access or trunk port. It'll say the flavor of device this is, the serial number, what firmware version it's got, right? It's like a bunch of good information already variabilized, ready for me to utilize. So I'm gathering facts, and particularly I'm doing this to see how the interface is configured, right? Because I just want to do it on trunk ports, and this is how I'm going to figure it out. I'm just going to pull it, and I'm going to have all of those ports ready to go for my automation down below. Next, I'm going to use the NXOS command module, and I really should have had this fully qualified collection name, so it should have namespace Cisco, then collection NXOS dot NXOS underscore command. I digress. Here we are issuing a simple command, show CDP neighbors. Nothing too complex about that. I'm sure you've issued that a million times. I know I have. But here I'm piping that to JSON. So Nexus and a lot of modern switches allow you to do this, to take it and format all the information that comes out as JSON, which means I don't have to do anything crazy. I don't have to do any manipulation of the information that comes through, like any filtering, to like figure out what my information actually is that I'm trying to gather, right? Because it's going to return back a bunch of stuff. So it's going to return back the name of the device on the remote end, its port that it's found on, the port of the remote device, right? Like a bunch of information. And so if I tell it to go JSON, it's already variabilized for me, and I can just access it in the registered variable here. So registering a variable means any of the output that was created, stick it in this variable. And that's what leads us to this final section down here, where this is where the work really actually happens. And so this, I'm using the built-in include tasks, and I am doing a loop. So here I am looping through the CDP neighbor information, and one by one for each CDP neighbor, I'm going to call this task file. So remember, when I hit the task file, it's just one CDP neighbor that I'm checking, and I'm going to further loop through there. So by default, whenever I specify a loop, all of the returned information is stored in a variable named item. Now, if I'm doing nested loops, I can't just use item on the outside, right? Because if it's outer, the variable is named item, and then you're trying on the inner variable to use item, you're going to have a bad time, right? So what you could do is add the loop control option, and then here loop var, I'm changing what the name of the variable is. And here I'm just changing it to be CDP underscore loop. So the outer loop, which is going to be our CDP neighbor, is going to be CDP underscore loop. And then inside, I'm just going to keep it as item. So now that we are looping through for each CDP neighbor, I'm going to open the task file, and it's going to call this task file, and it's actually going to loop through just this one individual task right here. You can see that the actual loop section gets pretty long, but before we get there, I am running this in check mode because I demo this stuff to customers a lot, and I don't actually want it to make the change. I just want it to simulate what it would do. So I put that one individual line in check mode. Yours would most likely not have that. I'm using the NXOS underscore interfaces module here. And for that, I'm just telling it the configuration, the desired state I want it to be in. And by default, it's going to do merge. So anything I add here, it will merge it into the existing config. So anything that I'm node overriding will just stay exactly the way it was. Here I am specifying the CDP neighbor interface. So remember, in that return information, it's going to tell me what interface it's found on. And then I'm going to be setting the description. So it is also going to be the CDP device that it's finding on the remote end, what's its name, as well as the port ID. So what is it reporting back that its port name is? So if I'm connecting to switch 2, it'll say switch 2. And if switch 2 is reporting that its interface is 1/5, then it'll be switch 2 on 1/5, right? So it's pretty succinct description. You'll kind of know what's going on there. So what is with this crazy loop information I'm doing down here? This is where I'm getting a little bit more granular, more specific, and I'm trying to do some extra filtering. So this is built on a blog post that I have right here, and it's linked in the a little bit lower in the blog post itself. So a blog post to a blog post, getting a little meta there. But this one teaches you how to loop with advanced filtering, either over lists or dictionaries, right? And so it gets into all the minutia of what I'm doing along with examples. But to keep it short, this is my gathered info, right? So this is my gathered facts from the device. I'm looking in there for the Ansible net interfaces. That comes back as a dictionary, and I can't loop over a dictionary, so I pipe that to dict2 items, which breaks that into key value pairs, so it actually makes it loopable. Inside of there, I am then piping that over to the select attribute plugin, and I'm looking in the key variable, and I'm making sure it equals to the CDP interface we are working on right now. So while I'm specifying a loop, in the information I'm actually filtering here, it's only going to return a single entry, right? One interface. So I know this is only going to iterate a single time. So it will find the exact interface I want, and it's going to find the information for it. So I am going to make sure that the mode variable is defined, and that's the one that's going to tell me whether it's trunk or access. Here I'm going to do map, which means instead of having it in key value pair and all that good stuff, it's just going to take the raw value of this variable, and it's going to return just that. So it's going to return access or trunk, or in the case of the management interface, it'll come back null. And so since that does come back null, I'm piping that one more time over to the default plugin, and I'm saying by default, you'll just say it's access, right? So if it's the management 0 interface, instead of being null, which would probably break things, or potentially could, depending on what you're looping through and checking on and all that good stuff, I'm just saying give it a default of access, right? So the entry will say access. So unless it's trunk, it's pretty much going to say access. So again, we're looping through, we're finding the exact port we need. If it is a trunk, it will go ahead and process. If it's not, it's just going to skip it. So let me pop back to my automation platform. So I remember I did launch it. I'll pop back to details output just so that it refreshes the screen. So looping through the CDP neighbors, I believe there's 5 of them. You can see for each one of those, it pulls up the neighbor and then we'll kick over to the the include task. So it's pulling that task file and it's going to look through. You can see skipping. That means everything was fine, everything processed okay, it just didn't meet the conditional criteria. So skip. And on this last one, you can see item actually equaled trunk and was 1/5. And so if I scroll all the way to the very bottom, it'll show me the actual config that it merged in with. So Ethernet 1/5 is on Red Hat border router on VLAN 50 workshops. So there you have it. I could have this run against all of my infrastructure and it will find all the CDP neighbors that are switches, right, configured for trunk ports, and it will set up those descriptions automatically. So I'm curious if you have any ways you would tweak or tune or change this. Drop me a comment down below if you find it useful. Comment down below as well. And if nothing else, thanks and happy automating. Bye.